Good morning, good evening, and good night, everybody. My name is Sarah, and today we'll be discussing all the series I have no intention of finishing. Now, I have read a lot of books in my short amount of time on YouTube. I love reading a lot. It is a well-known fact, however, I absolutely suck at picking up the sequels to some of my favorite books. I'm working on that, but first I need to get rid of all the books that I have no intention on reading again. Now, I am not talking about any of the series that I have DNF'd. If I DNF'd, it is very obvious I'm not continuing the series. But a lot of these books that I'm going to talk about, I gave like 3 stars. In one case, I believe I gave 4 stars, but I have no intention of continuing the series. I have no intention of looking on into the world. And it's interesting because I felt like the story was good enough to just be left alone, or it wasn't good enough to continue. That's a lot of these cases. Like, they were great, but I'm not interested. So with that being said, let's dive on in. One of the first series I really want to talk about is the MultiE series. Not a lot of people know that this actually has a sequel. The sequel, I believe, is called The Daughter of MultiE. MultiE is a historical fiction story that takes place on the quarantine island MultiE. It takes place during the leprosy outbreak in Hawaii. It's a very interesting point in history. World War II is happening. The Queen of Hawaii is being dethroned by the government. Like, yes, America had a relationship with Hawaii, but then when the king died and the queen wanted a bit more of her land back, the United States was like, no, you're not allowed to have a kingdom anymore, you're part of the US, and they basically dethroned her. All this is happening while a leprosy outbreak is going on, and no one really knows what this disease means and how contagious it is, so they just took everyone who was infected and sent them off to a quarantine island. And you're expected to die on that island. No one is able to get off it unless you test negative for having the disease. Like, you go through the treatment and somehow it stops being active in your body. That's very rare. This story follows the story of Rachel, a young girl who was, I believe, like 7 when the story started, and it goes through her entire life story as she grows up on a quarantine island after it's discovered that she has leprosy. When I mean her entire life story, I mean into grandma age. Like, she has a child during this, and that is what the Daughter of MultiE is. It's Rachel's daughter, because if you have a child on the island and the child does not have leprosy, they cannot live on the island. They must give the child up for adoption. And World War II, like I mentioned, was happening, and the daughter of Rachel ended up being adopted by a Japanese-American family, and the story of the Daughter of MultiE is supposedly, I haven't read it, supposed to take place during the internment camp era. And that is interesting. I've read very little stories that focus on the internment camp. I do like historical fiction, but that's kind of an area that I felt like I've been avoiding. A lot of World War II history I've just been avoiding. I'm not the big fan of that point in history because it was so much going on at such a short amount of time that really is encapsulated in Rachel's and her daughter's life. And I don't have much of an interest of reading that sort of story. This was incredibly interesting because I knew absolutely nothing about the leprosy outbreak in Hawaii, but I know enough about the internment camp stories. Like, trust me, I'm not that far away from Little Tokyo in LA, like back in California. So we got to visit the internment camp, like, museum as a field trip for my class. So I am very aware of that history. This was something I wanted to read because I wasn't aware. Daughter of MultiE, maybe not so much. So I believe this stands best as a standalone. The sequel, definitely an interesting thing if you want to learn more about that history. I was more focused on this though. I promise I won't spend that long talking about every single story, but that one was like, that's the only book I gave like 4 or 5 stars. I'm in love with, but I'm not continuing with the series. So I felt like I needed to justify myself. So, onto all the other books. The next series that I will not be finishing is the Daevavad trilogy. I read the first 2 books in this. The first book was really interesting. It is about a girl who grew up in Cairo, Egypt, and one day she accidentally stumbles upon the jinn, and the jinn's like, hey, you're not entirely human. We need to take you to the Daevavad, which is a magical city that, like, all the jinn live in. Jinn are basically genie. And it's cool and magical, and then it becomes very political because it's discovered that our main character is actually the daughter of one of the tribes that everyone believed to be extinct, and she's very important. And then, like, arranged marriages and love triangles, and I'm just like, it got really political in the second book, and it got, like, the relationships were not healthy, and it was interesting. If you like political stories, this is a great fantasy that's highly political. They're very long books. I don't like long political stories, so I have no intention of finishing this series. On to the next book, and that is The Diviners. I just finished reading the first book. I hated it. Hate is really kind of a strong word, but I gave this book 2 stars, and that is incredibly difficult for me to do. I just kept forcing myself to read this book. It is set in our world, 1920s New York, where characters begin showing up with powers that aren't quite normal. Our main character actually can take an object that means something to you and read your deepest secrets from that. Another character can walk in dreams. Another character can have people just not notice them. And the first book is kind of this murder mystery where people are dying and they think it has something to do with the occult, but they're not entirely sure. And I did not like it. I felt the characters were bratty. I felt the world building was annoying. Like, I know it takes place in 1920s New York. Only one character used 1920s slang, and they used it excessively, and the characters were naive and boring, and just, I didn't like anything about the series. I literally cannot name anything about this that I enjoyed. I still gave it 2 stars because, like, it wasn't, like, awful, but if it had a different plot, I might have liked it. The next series I've talked about, I was kind of a little hesitant to put this on here because I know my library has a second audiobook. I just don't know if I'm ever going to pick it up, and that is the Nixia trade. I believe this is a trilogy. It is all about a sci-fi like story about kids who are brought in by this very specific organization. They're like, hey, you are going to go into space for us. And it's discovered that all these kids have broken past, all these kids have broken like backstories. That's why they were chosen to go on the space expedition. The problem is, however, 12 kids were chosen, only 10 kids can make it. The first book is all about their travels into space and their competition to see who will make it onto the planet, who will be the one to harvest this rare mineral known as Nixia. That's supposed to be worth it's supposed to be like the most valuable object in the universe. Like, no one has found something quite like Nixia. Incredibly rare, incredibly powerful. So this company wants to harness it, and they promise that these kids will get wealth beyond their wildest dreams if they can make it onto the planet. So that's the entire book, is the setup, the trial, the conflict between all the characters, and you learn to like most of them. And the second book is all supposed to be their time on the planet. It's all supposed to be what's going down. I don't really care though. Like, it was very interesting. The first book, there's nothing wrong with it. I enjoyed it. It's just that I don't think it's set up enough for me to care about the next book. You kind of got what I wanted out of the first book, and that's about it. Like, I don't need to know what happens next. I don't need to know what happens while I'm on this planet. Like, that's kind of it. Like, I'm happy with the space trial. You got me there. I'm done. Another series that I just read the first book for very recently, that is The Blood of the Stars. The first book of this, which I read, was Spin the Dawn. This was pitched as a Mulan/Project Runway story where, like, our main character was sent off to the Imperial Palace because their family was chosen to compete in the competition that's supposed to choose the next Imperial Tailor. However, only men can be the Imperial Tailor, so when the girl's the only one in the house who can sew, she cuts her hair and goes off to this competition. I've mentioned this in my wrap-up. I do not like how this format was set up. It was only the first third of the book that was this epic competition, and I wanted that to be in the entire book. And then it involves magic, and then you have to go on a magical adventure, and then there was like a love situation romance that was like, it was really weird with the age differences and the trials and consequences. Book 2 was totally going to focus on the consequences of the relationship. And I do not like romance. I do not like relationships, and I was not interested in anything this book had to offer other than the competition, which again wrapped up in the first third of the book. So I will not be reading the series. Like, no, I should have DNF'd this. I really should have, and I don't want to make that mistake again, so I'm not even going to pick up book 2. The next series I will not be continuing is the Sidekick Squad. So, a very long time ago, I was obsessed with trying to get my hands on the book called Not Your Sidekick. I really wanted to read this book because I heard it had great, like, asexual representation. I heard it had a female-female romance. I heard a very unique dynamic between the hero and a villain because it's set up in a world where there's heroes and villains. And it's just that I had a lot of trouble getting my hands on the first book. It didn't live up to all the expectations I had because it took me so long to get this book. I didn't like the writing style. I didn't like the character development. The world building was interesting, it really was, but beyond that, it was just kind of bland. And I know the asexual representation doesn't show up until book 3, but it's just like, I don't want to get to book 3. I don't even want to read book 2. And book 2, I believe, is not your villain, or it's something like, it's very much set up like you're starting your own path, you're starting your own like world, and I'm not interested. If I see book 2 at like a used bookstore, I'll pick it up, but I'm not going to hunt it down. I'm not interested in going through all that struggle again, so not continuing this series. Next up, we are talking about the janitors of the post-apocalypse. This book, again, is a sci-fi, and sci-fi is really hit or miss for me. Sometimes I absolutely love it, sometimes I really don't, and this kind of fell in the don't. It is all about a world where the Earth hundreds of years ago went feral and all of humanity just kind of crumpled in on itself. And the aliens come and rescue certain humans and they revive them back to their normal human state. They don't remember what happened, but they're like, hey, thank you for making us not kill each other. What can we do? And a lot of the humans end up being janitors working on these alien spaceships. Stuff goes down, and the entire ship that our main character is working on more or less kills itself, and so the janitors are the only ones left monitoring and trying to fly this giant spaceship, trying to figure out what's going on, and surviving the feral animals and aliens that now reside in the ship that used to be their former crewmates. It's just, I don't know why I don't want to continue the story. It just kind of felt weird to me the way the ending was set up. It's a very interesting concept, and like the kind of like reveal and the understanding that's like what's going on in the end, it wasn't satisfying. Like I felt like there was potential, but at the same time kind of not. It was, I don't know how to describe it. It's not a series I want to continue. It worked great as a standalone. There is definitely plot points that could continue into the second book. I see potential there, but I don't really care. Okay, and the last series I will not be continuing is the Heroine Complex. This is a story, again, that's superhero based, and it's all about our main character who works as sort of the blogger slash PR person for the local superhero of, I believe it's San Francisco that they're set up in. It's some sort of like high profile US city. Our hero, that is the boss of our main character, she ends up getting injured during a fight right before this huge gala, and she makes her PR person dress up and pretend to be her and just kind of pretend to like be her and do her job and go to these galas and go like be superhero and stuff, even though she's a PR person. Like public relations and being a superhero, not entirely the same job description. So it is a lot about trying to transition into that new life, trying to transition into being a superhero when you don't really have the kind of abilities that people expect you to have, especially when you're playing an established person. It's very, how do I put this? A lot of the characters were really annoying. A lot of the characters were really, it was mostly the characters I didn't like in the story. And it's been such a long time since I've read this, I didn't like it. It just felt so like, it felt like these characters were teenagers. Like they were kind of that kind of drama going on, and I wasn't interested in it. I had enough teenage drama going on. Like, I don't need this in my life and in my literature. Like, no. So immature characters were the huge downfall of this series for me. I will not be picking up book 2. There was also some huge problems with asexual like discrimination and just, I made a whole review on this a very long time ago. It's not a good video, but I've explained myself so much better in that series, and it was just, it doesn't directly say that asexuals are inhuman, but it very heavily implies that. Yeah, I don't know why I kept reading this. So those are all the series that I will not be continuing, one reason or another. Either I hated them with a burning passion, or they're just too good and I don't want to continue on to the next book. So if you guys want to force me to read any of these books, I will have one thing I will forever turn down, and that's a Heroine Complex. But other than that, I'm willing to listen to your suggestions. So please leave that down in the comment section down below. And while you're there, don't forget to hit like and subscribe. And as always, good night, good evening, and good morning, everybody.